You know, why do we have to have a membership? You know, because we are there to assist and represent the people in Saskatchewan who are off reserve, non-status, basically who have no representation because they're off reserve, they're non-status, or people who are, you know, Métis and not a member of the MNS. So, you know, there's people that are not with those organizations for a reason. Um, as people come in, we are working with them, but you know, we're trying to develop our organization based on kinship rather than and to move away from what you're talking about, the 6-2 and the 6-3. Like, it's, you know, those are all colonial things, and we don't want that in our organization. But the government always is going to put their nose in and tell you how you should be doing it. So these are steps that we're in the process of right now, and you know, in trying to represent everybody, but trying to keep away from that colonial system.
Okay, two things you need to look at. First of all, the status of your organization. Is it just an administrative structure versus a political structure of your organization? And I'm talking about administrative structures that only implement what's there now. And your capacity to implement what you have to do, you need a political organization to be able to develop the laws and policy that impact on your political organization and your governing structure. It's like any other group of people and interested groups that have to govern and move on their issues. Now, the other matter is another political agenda. When do we discuss and fully debate the portability of our sovereignty, the portability of our inherent rights and title, the portability of our treaties and treaty rights? Now, that's not being discussed anywhere today. Yet, when you talk about the tax issue, that's the other one I use as an example for special and unique laws that we need. People know nothing about tax immunity. Why? Never discussed, never addressed. What is tax immunity? We have tax immunity because we have sovereignty. We have tax immunity because we have treaties. And Revenue Canada done a secret study a few years ago confirming what I'm talking about. But we have tax exemption because we have treaty providing for goods and services at the expense of the crown. We have tax exemption because there's socioeconomic benefits in the treaties. We have tax exemption because we have inherent rights. Now you see, if you want to play down the source of your rights and don't want to assert them and enforce them, you can't even deal with what I just finished talking about. Now the other thing, Sol Sanderson's sovereignty and inherent rights, treaties and treaty rights are portable. No such thing as a non-reserve off-reserve Indian anymore. Not just the treaties deal with that, but now Section 35 recognizes that. That's why the feds are so nervous about having to do what we're talking about. So when I talk about our sovereignty and our inherent rights and treaty rights being portable, that's between communities, that's regionally, nationally, and internationally. And that whole framework again that I talk about, and UNDRIP as one of the instruments governing it, that portability is major portability of individuals and collective members and the status of our governance. So we even play around in the colonial system that, oh, chief and council, your jurisdiction ends at that reserve boundary. You can't go on beyond that reserve boundary with exercising your jurisdiction. It's like falling off the edge of the earth in the old days, where they thought the world was flat. Well, sorry, the Indian lands and resources are not flat. The jurisdiction of our governing systems under the sovereignty of our nations has to be extended beyond those reserve boundaries, regionally, nationally, internationally. And right now, the Indian Affairs policy for self-government is trying to restrict us to internal powers only. I say no. We have internal powers, we have external powers, and we have international powers. Under our inherent sovereignty, our inherent rights to self-determination, and under the treaties, the international treaties, and that major framework that includes Section 35, and now UNDRIP. So you see, when do we get to discuss portability of who we are, of our status, of our rights? We don't. So we're still thinking around those colonial policies that terminated that, extinguished all that. So we got a lot of homework.
Yeah. So, and currently, one of the comments is currently it's uneven application of portability.
You're not kidding, because we're not dealing with it.
Yeah.
Like when I talk about the Take Essay Green Citizenship Act, we better be dealing with that portability right in our own laws, our own acts. But what are they doing in NISCA today? NISCA government has NISCA local government in Vancouver to provide the services to all their Indians living in Vancouver because they're entitled to the benefits under the NISCA agreement. But we have treaties that apply to our people no matter where they are. Like I just finished saying, they have a local government of NISCA Nation government in Terrace, BC, where they have a bunch of their members. So you see, they're already doing it in terms of recognizing that portability in the NISCA territory. And for their funding, they get total funding for the Nisga'a Nation and population based on the Nisga'a Citizenship Act, not the Indian Affairs policy of a non-reserve off-reserve Indian. The reason they got to do that is because there's no reserves in Nisga'a territory anymore. It's all Nisga'a land and territory. You see?
Mm-hmm.
Well, just because we have a reserve, it doesn't mean that we can apply the same portability of our status and our rights. But we get it caught up in a non-reserve Indian, or off-reserve Indian, in that political game. I've never played it. That's why government is always hesitant to meet with me in dealing with the issues because they're afraid to get educated.
Yeah.
But you see, that's a political game. What are we doing?
Yeah.
It's interesting what Saul when he talks about the treaty making. But my understanding, Saul, is whether I'm right or wrong, but under UNDRIP, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, does it give provision for treaties to be established in urban areas like the city of Saskatoon or the city of PA and others? I'm curious because how did the 3 urban reserves in Saskatoon come to be, or the urban reserves in Prince Albert, when the provision of UNDRIP questions that? And in respect to the Daniels case, the Daniels case also talked about the possibility of modern treaties. Now, I'd like you to speak on how modern treaties can be established. Thank you.
Okay, the modern treaties are treaties that were negotiated with the feds under their comprehensive specific claims policy initiative. And when they negotiated the modern treaties, they had to include negotiation of their form of government they wanted to implement. And they didn't realize that they were negotiating a form of government that would limit them to local government status. But also, because the federal government ratified the modern treaties by themselves, like the James Bay Cree and Escapi Agreement, they have the federal government James Bay Cree and Escapi Act, It was passed by the Parliament and the federal government for implementation, but there's no Cree Act implementing the James B. Queen-Escapee Agreement. But the province of Quebec also adopted that similar type act respecting that agreement. So that domesticated their treaty. But the door is open right now to negotiate new treaties. Now in BC, they just issued a new set of principles to negotiate the implementation of their negotiations on treaty. The first principle they agreed to federally with the province and the chief summit in BC is they recognize the sovereignty of the nations. The second agreement that they made is they recognize the inherent sovereignty remaining intact in the title to their lands and resources, but with a condition they have to work out their own overlapping jurisdiction and interests on those traditional lands and resource territories. But along with that, having to keep in mind the Crown's title to lands and resources. So there's a whole new system being implemented and moved along with now for treaty negotiations that provides for the recognition of sovereignty up front. And that makes a hell of a difference in terms of asserting the national powers of treaty making. The UN Declaration has several articles that can be used to deal with the implementation of treaties, but also the enforcement and implementation of those treaties. And those articles are available now. You don't have to wait for that Bill C-15 to be passed. And there's many articles in that UNDRIP agreement that impacts on education, for example. Those can be used right now. And the province and the feds have to amend their laws and policies to implement UNDRIP provisions that's there. So that's what's going on. But again, you see, where are our laws? Where is our jurisdiction being promoted and asserted under our jurisdiction and laws? But you see, we have internal resistance to our own jurisdiction. We have internal resistance to our inherent legal system. And that's pretty critical. But the Minister of Justice and the Prime Minister announced recognition of the administration of our own justice system. And they also announced recognition of our inherent legal system. And when Judy Wilson got into trouble with the government and Privy Council, Warniak, clerk of Privy Council, she declared in her 10 principles that she issued that everybody rejected, including AFN. Well, and she implemented them by developing what they call the 22 justice directives. And you need to look at those. You need to go through them. Those justice directives are based on what? He said they're based on the Crown Indian Nations relations that's based on the foundation of recognition of inherent rights. So it's a long answer again, but thank you.
Thank you, Sol. Good question, Alan. We're going to go to Rebecca's video.